Edinburgh held its breath in November the way it always did. Grey sky pressing down against grey stone, the smell of coal smoke and cold rain finding every gap in every window frame. 3 years. 3 years since Seraphina Voss had last stood in a room with Julian Ashford, and in all that time she had taught 37 students, completed 4 commissions, learned to sleep without dreaming of Ravenmore, and never once played the Schubert sonata through to its final bar. She had stopped, always, at the same measure, the one she had been playing the night of the Whitmore ball, the night she heard what she heard, the night she removed his ring and pressed it into the space between the keys of a borrowed piano and walked out into the dark without her cloak. She had been 26 then. She was 29 now, and the girl who had stood in that corridor with her hand over her mouth had become a woman who did not speak of it, did not permit herself to speak of it, because to speak of it would be to admit that it still moved in her, like something alive. And then the knock came. The lesson had been going well. Eleanor Forsyth, 12 years old, the daughter of a solicitor on Harriet Row, had the Schubert passage nearly under her fingers, the phrasing still tentative but honest, the way only a child's playing could be honest. Seraphina sat beside her on the bench and did not think about where she had learned this piece. She had taught herself not to think about it. Slower through the middle section, Seraphina said. You are rushing because you are uncertain. Play it slowly enough to be certain, and then the tempo will come. Eleanor tried again. Seraphina watched her hands and listened, and for a few minutes there was nothing in the world but the music room above the gray winter street, the sound of the instrument, and the discipline of attention. When the lesson ended and Eleanor had gathered her music and her coat and clattered down the stairs, the child was constitutionally incapable of descending stairs quietly. Seraphina remained at the piano a moment longer. She straightened the sheet music. She closed the lid over the keys. She was reaching for the lamp to turn it down when Mrs. Maitland, her landlady, appeared in the doorway with the particular expression she wore when something had disrupted the household's order. There is a gentleman downstairs, Mrs. Maitland said. He will not give his name. He says only that he has come about a ring left in a piano. Seraphina's hands went still on the lamp. The sheet music was already closed. She closed it again, pressing her palm flat against the cover, though it needed no pressing. How long has he been waiting? Seraphina asked. A quarter of an hour, Mrs. Maitland said. He refused to be shown to the parlor. He is standing in the entrance hall. He said he would wait there until you were ready. Standing in the entrance hall. Not seated in the parlor, not pacing on the step, not demanding to be announced again, standing and waiting. That detail lodged in Seraphina's chest before she could stop it. She smoothed her dress, which needed no smoothing. She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. Then she went downstairs. Julian Ashford stood in her entrance hall with his hat in both hands. And the first thing she noticed, the first thing, before the 3 years of change in his face, before the particular quality of the stillness he had always carried, was that he looked precisely as she had known he would look. Not unchanged. Changed in the way that men changed when something had cost them. A new quiet around the eyes, a certain economy of expression that had not been there at 26 when he had been sure of everything. He was 34 now. He looked it. Lady Seraphina, Julian said. Mr. Ashford. She had stopped using his title in her own mind 3 years ago. She found she could not begin again now, without it feeling like a concession she had not decided to make. Neither of them moved for a moment that lasted longer than it should have. You said nothing to Mrs. Maitland about the nature of your business, Seraphina said. I thought it better not to, Julian replied. What I have to say is not something I wished relayed through a landlady. Then you had better come into the parlor. Seraphina said. She led him through the narrow hallway and into the front room, where a fire burned low and the afternoon light was already failing. She did not offer tea. She stood near the window, and he stood near the door, and the distance between them, no more than 8 feet of faded carpet and 3 years of silence, held everything that had not yet been said. "I found the ring," Julian said. "Or rather, the estate's piano tuner found it 3 years ago and brought it to me. I have had it since then." Seraphina said nothing. "I have been trying to understand," Julian continued, "why you placed it where you did. Not on my desk, not returned by a servant. Inside the instrument itself, in the gap between 2 keys." He paused. "It was not an accident." "No," Seraphina said. "It was not. I would like you to explain it to me." She looked at him for a long moment. The fire shifted. Outside, a carriage passed on the wet cobblestones, and the sound of it faded slowly. "Keep the ring, Mr. Ashford," Seraphina said. "Whatever explanation you have come for, I cannot give you one that would satisfy you. Keep it and consider the matter closed." "I have tried to consider it closed," Julian said. "For 3 years. It has not closed." He reached into the breast pocket of his coat and set the ring on the table between them, a single small object on the dark wood, catching what light remained. He did not push it toward her. He set it down and stepped back. Then he sat in the chair nearest the door, placed his hat on his knee, and did not move toward leaving. "I did not come to Edinburgh to argue with you," Julian said. "I came because I have spent 3 years not knowing why you left, and I find I cannot continue not knowing. That is the whole of it." Seraphina looked at the ring on the table. She did not pick it up. "You are asking me to reopen something I have spent considerable effort closing," she said. "I am asking you to tell me what happened," Julian replied. "I am not asking for more than that." She almost said something then. The words were there. The corridor, the music, the particular way his voice had dropped to barely above a breath, the words she had heard him say to Clara in the dark. She almost said all of it. But she had spent 3 years building the habit of silence around those words, and the habit did not break easily. "I will not keep the ring," Julian said, when she did not speak. "You may do with it what you choose. But I will not take it back as though it settles anything, because it settles nothing." He stayed another 20 minutes. They spoke of nothing that mattered. Edinburgh's weather, the length of his journey, and beneath every word was the weight of what neither of them said. When he finally rose and took his leave, Seraphina stood at the parlor window and watched his carriage pull away down the wet street. Then she went back upstairs to the music room. She sat down at the piano and opened the lid over the keys. She placed her hands on the opening notes of the Schubert Sonata, and for the first time in 3 years, she played it through to the final bar. He came back the following morning. Seraphina was in the music room when Mrs. Maitland knocked. She had been sitting at the piano without playing, which was something she rarely permitted herself, because sitting without playing was simply sitting with everything she was avoiding. "Mr. Ashford again," Mrs. Maitland said, with the particular tone of a woman who had drawn her own conclusions and was keeping them to herself with some effort. "Show him to the parlor," Seraphina said. "I will be down directly." She took her time. Not out of cruelty, she did not think it was cruelty, but because she needed the moment on the stairs to arrange her face into something that would not show him everything. Julian was standing at the parlor window when she entered, looking out at the street below. He turned when she came in. "I have a proposal," he said. "Not a demand. a single condition, and after that I will not trouble you again." Seraphina sat down. "Then state it." "You left a composition at Ravenmore," Julian said. "Unfinished. The manuscript is still in the music room. I have not moved it, nor permitted anyone else to touch it. I am offering you the opportunity to retrieve it. One visit, I will arrange for the house to be properly staffed for your arrival. You may take the manuscript and anything else you left behind, and after that, if you wish it, I will consider our acquaintance concluded." Seraphina looked at him for a long moment. She had not thought about the composition in months. She had trained herself not to think about it, the same way she had trained herself not to play the Schubert through to its end. But it was there. 47 pages of work she had never been able to reconstruct from memory, because the best parts of it had come from somewhere she could not reach anymore. "One visit," she said. "One visit," Julian confirmed. "And after that, you will not come to Edinburgh again." "If that is what you want," he said. "Yes." She considered it. She knew, even as she considered it, that stepping back inside Ravenmore would make the last 3 years impossible to sustain as a complete severance. You could not walk back into a place that held 3 years of your unlived life and walk out again unchanged. She knew this. She agreed anyway. "Very well," Seraphina said. "I will need a day to arrange my affairs here." "Of course," Julian said. "I will wait." She rose to take her leave of him. They were standing now, and she reached for her cloak, which was draped over the back of the chair nearest the door. She lifted it and began to swing it over her shoulders, and Julian moved before she had registered that he had moved. An instinct, nothing more. The reflex of a man who had spent years in rooms where women wore cloaks and required assistance. His hands came to rest on her shoulders as the cloak settled into place. Just for a moment. Just the weight of his hands through the wool. And then he stepped back. Neither of them commented on it. Seraphina fastened the clasp at her throat and did not look at him directly. "Tomorrow, then," she said. His voice was quiet. "Tomorrow," Julian agreed. They returned to Edinburgh after the visit to Ravenmore, and the following morning Julian arrived at Heriot Row at 9 o'clock, which was early enough that Seraphina had not yet finished her first cup of tea. She received him in the parlor, with the cup still in her hand, which was not proper, and which she did not bother to correct. "I want you to repeat it," she said, before he had fully sat down. "What you said to Clara that night at the Whitmore ball. I want you to repeat the exact words." Julian went very still. "Seraphina." "Exactly," she said. "Not approximately. Exactly." He looked at her for a long moment, and she watched him decide something. She could see the decision moving through him, the way he set down the cost of it and picked up the obligation. "I said," Julian began carefully, "that I loved her, that I had always loved her, that she was not alone in it and would not be, whatever came next." He paused. "Those were the words." "Yes," Seraphina said. "Those were the words." The cup was still in her hand. She set it down on the table between them because her hand had developed a slight unsteadiness that she did not want him to observe. "I was standing in the corridor," she said, "behind the half-open door. I had gone to find Clara because she had been away from the ballroom for nearly half an hour, and I was concerned. I heard your voice before I reached the door. I stopped. I heard everything you said." She paused. "I did not ask you about it. I did not ask Clara about it. I went back to the ballroom. I danced the next set with Lord Fenwick. I smiled at 4 separate people. And at the end of the evening, I removed your ring and left it in the piano." Julian said nothing. He was looking at her with an expression she had never seen on his face before. Not guilt, not defensiveness, but something that looked very much like a man realizing that the ground he had been standing on for 3 years was not the ground he had believed it to be. "You never told me you were there," he said. "No," Seraphina said. "I did not." "And I never knew," Julian said. "I never knew you had been standing in that corridor. I went back to the ballroom and I danced with you, and I thought—" He stopped. "I thought everything was as it had been." "Yes," Seraphina said. "That is what I understood later, that you had no idea." "Why did you not ask me?" The question was not an accusation. It was quiet and genuinely bewildered. "Why did you not simply ask me what it meant?" "Because," Seraphina said, and her voice was perfectly level, "I had heard you say that you loved her. In that particular tone, in that particular darkness, with her weeping in your arms. There are things a woman hears that she cannot then unhear by asking a question. If I had asked and you had denied it, I would not have believed you. And if I had asked and you had confirmed it—" She stopped. "Either way, I would have lost the same thing." "So you chose to lose it without asking," Julian said. "I chose," Seraphina said carefully, "not to humiliate myself by demanding an explanation for something I had witnessed with my own senses." Julian stood up from the chair and walked to the window. He stood there with his back to her for a moment, and when he turned around, his face had changed. Not softened, exactly, but opened. "I need you to understand," he said, "that I did not know you were there. I need you to understand that not as an excuse, but as a fact. I have spent 3 years not knowing why you vanished. Every explanation I constructed was wrong, because the one thing I never imagined was that you had been standing in that corridor. I understand that now," Seraphina said. "I did not understand it 3 years ago, because 3 years ago I believed you knew what I had heard and had chosen not to speak of it. It was only when you arrived in Edinburgh asking about the ring that I began to consider that you might genuinely not know." "I genuinely did not know," Julian said. She met his eyes steadily. "Yes," Seraphina said. "I can see that." They stood on either side of the parlor table with 3 years of silence between them, and for the first time both failures were visible at once, hers for not asking, and his for never imagining that she might need to. "We were both very certain of things we had not verified," Seraphina said at last. He exhaled slowly. "Yes," Julian said. "We were." They left the house together afterward, walking toward the booksellers on George Street, where Seraphina had an errand. The street was damp from the morning's rain, and the cobblestones were slick. They were passing the corner of Castle Street when a carriage swung around the turn too quickly, the driver losing the line, the near wheel skidding wide across the pavement. Julian stepped in front of her without thought, no decision, no hesitation, simply his body between hers and the carriage, before she had registered the danger. The vehicle corrected and passed, and Seraphina steadied herself with one hand, flat against his chest, her fingers pressing briefly against the wool of his coat over his sternum. She felt his breath. She did not move her hand for a half-second longer than was necessary. Neither did he. Then she stepped back, and they continued down the street, and neither spoke of it. Seraphina had intended to return to Edinburgh the following day. She did not. There was always some reason. The composition needed 1 more hour. The light in the music room was better in the morning. The manuscript required careful handling before it could be transported. She told herself these things, and Julian did not question them, which was its own kind of answer. On the second evening, he found her in the music room and asked if she would play something. "What would you like to hear?" Seraphina asked. "Whatever you are working on," Julian said. "Or whatever you choose. I am not particular." She moved to the bench, and Julian sat beside her, close enough that she was aware of the exact distance between his hand and hers when he rested it on the keys, not touching, simply present. She played for 20 minutes without speaking, and the distance between their hands became its own kind of conversation, each of them aware of it and neither of them resolving it. When she stopped playing, the quiet that settled over the room was different from the quiet before she had begun. Then the letter arrived. Mrs. Maitland brought it up on a small tray, thick paper, a formal seal, addressed to Lady Seraphina Voss in a hand that Seraphina did not immediately recognize. She broke the seal and read it. Then she read it again. Lady Octavia Stanhope, Julian's aunt. The letter was 3 paragraphs, each more precise than the last. The first established that Lady Octavia was aware of Seraphina's presence in Edinburgh and of Julian's visits there. The second made clear that society regarded Seraphina's disappearance 3 years prior as an act of cowardice. A woman who had accepted a duke's proposal and then fled without explanation, leaving his household and his name exposed to speculation and gossip. The third paragraph noted, with particular care, that Julian had never corrected this account, had never offered any version of events that might have protected Seraphina's reputation, had, in effect, permitted the world to think whatever it wished. Seraphina set the letter down on the piano lid. Julian was still in the room. He had seen her expression change while she read. "Lady Octavia," Seraphina said. It was not a question. He gave a single nod. "Yes," Julian said. "She says that society considers me a coward." Seraphina's voice was even. "She says you have never corrected that account." Julian said nothing immediately. He was looking at the letter on the piano lid without reaching for it. "Is it true?" Seraphina asked. "In 3 years, did you say nothing to defend me?" "I said nothing about you," Julian said. "I said nothing at all. I did not know why you had left. I could not construct a defense of something I did not understand." "You could have said that you did not know the reason," Seraphina said. "You could have said that the fault was not mine. You could have said—" She stopped. "You had 3 years, Mr. Ashford. 3 years in which I have been understood by everyone who knew us to be a woman who accepted a duke's ring and then ran away from it like a frightened girl." "I know," Julian said. "And you said nothing." He looked at her without flinching. "I know," he said again. "I did not know what to say. I did not know what had happened. Every time someone spoke of it in my presence, I had no answer. I still do not have one that would satisfy you. I am aware of that." Seraphina picked up the letter and folded it along its original creases. She set it aside. She did not play again that evening, and Julian did not ask her to. The next letter came to Seraphina's Edinburgh lodgings on a Thursday morning in December, delivered not by post but by hand, by a small, plainly dressed woman of about 40, who gave her name as Miss Hartwell, and said only that she had been companion to Miss Clara Voss in the last year of her life. Seraphina received her in the parlor. "She asked me to find you," Miss Hartwell said, "before she died. She said she thought you ought to know. She wrote it down because she was afraid she would not say it clearly if she tried to speak it." Miss Hartwell placed a sealed letter on the table. "I have had it for 2 years. I was not easy to find, and neither were you." She left directly after, She did not stay for tea, and she did not explain further. Seraphina sat alone with the letter for several minutes before she opened it. Clara's handwriting. She would have known it anywhere. The slightly uneven loops, the way the letters crowded together when Clara was writing quickly. The letter was 2 pages. Seraphina read the first page, and then the second, and then she went back to the beginning and read it again. The corridor scene. Clara described it from where she had been standing. Julian's arms around her, her face against his shoulder, weeping. She had been diagnosed 3 weeks before the Whitmore ball. She had told Julian and no one else, because she could not bear the way people looked at her when they knew, and because she had not yet found the words to tell Seraphina. Julian had said what he said because she was dying and frightened, and she needed to hear it. The love was real. It was not the love Seraphina had feared. But the letter stopped there. 2 pages, and then it stopped. No mention of any promise. No explanation for why Julian had said nothing in the 3 years since. The letter answered one question and left the larger one standing in the room like a closed door. Seraphina folded the pages and held them in her lap. She went to the music room and closed the door. She did not play. She sat at the piano bench with the letter on the closed lid, and she stayed there, very still, while the light outside the window shifted from gray morning to gray afternoon. An hour later, she opened the door. Julian was sitting on the floor in the corridor, his back against the wall, his long legs stretched across the narrow passage. He had not knocked. He had simply waited. Seraphina looked at him for a moment. Then she sat down beside him on the floor, her back against the opposite wall, the letter still in her hands. Neither spoke. The lamp inside the music room burned behind the half-open door and cast a long, narrow stripe of light across the corridor floor between them. They sat there as the lamp burned lower, and when it finally guttered and went dark, neither of them had moved. Seraphina returned to Edinburgh the following morning. Julian wrote letters, not daily, every 3 or 4 days, delivered by his man to Harriet Row. They were not love letters. They were not apologies. They were factual and unornamented, each one describing a portion of Clara's final 11 months. The diagnosis in October, the months of treatment through the winter. The way Clara had insisted on attending 3 concerts in the spring because she had decided she would not spend her remaining time being careful, the date of her death in the following September. Julian wrote about these things plainly, without sentiment, as though he were giving a deposition. He did not yet name the promise. Seraphina read each letter in the order it arrived. She did not reply. Then Lady Octavia arrived in person. She came on a Tuesday afternoon without prior notice, which was precisely the kind of thing Lady Octavia would do. And she was shown into the parlor before Seraphina had a chance to instruct Mrs. Maitland otherwise. Lady Octavia was 61, impeccably dressed, and operated under the settled conviction that her presence in a room was itself an argument. "Lady Seraphina," she said, sitting down without being invited to, "I think we had better speak plainly." "I generally prefer plain speaking," Seraphina said, and sat across from her. "Ravenmore's position is not sustainable in its current form," Lady Octavia said. "My nephew has managed the estate by proxy for 3 years and has refused every reasonable social obligation that might have restored his standing. He has refused introductions. He has refused to attend the season. He has refused, most pointedly, to consider any of the several entirely suitable women who have been presented to him." She paused. "He is doing this because of you. I think you know that." "I know nothing of the sort," Seraphina said. Then I am telling you, Lady Octavia said, I am also telling you that if your intention is to return to Edinburgh permanently and leave him suspended in this half-life, then you ought to have the courage to say so directly, so that he can be made to see reason and move forward. Lady Octavia, Seraphina said, I am going to say something to you, and I hope you will receive it in the spirit in which it is meant. She paused. I am not the cause of your nephew's choices. Your nephew makes his own choices, as do I. You are welcome to advise him on the management of Ravenmoor and his social obligations. You are not welcome to arrive at my lodgings and advise me on what I ought to do with my own life. We are not so well acquainted as to make that appropriate. Lady Octavia regarded her for a long moment. You have more spine than I gave you credit for, she said finally. 3 years ago I thought you simply ran. I am aware of what you thought, Seraphina said. Lady Octavia rose and collected her gloves. At the door she paused. Whatever happened between you, and Julian has told me nothing, which is itself informative. I hope you will not let pride do the work that fear has already begun. She left without waiting for a response. That night, Seraphina sat at the table in her room with Julian's letters arranged in order before her, the earliest at her left hand and the most recent at her right. She read them through again, each one, and when she had finished, she sat for a long time without reading or playing, facing the window above the gray winter street where a single gas lamp made a yellow circle in the dark below. Clara had been dying. Julian had been keeping a vigil disguised as a social evening. And still, he had said nothing afterward. Not in the weeks following the ball, not in the year before Clara died, not in the 2 years since. There was still a door she had not opened. She could feel it. She took out paper and wrote a single sentence. I am coming back to Ravenmoor. Not for you, for the answer you have never been permitted to give me. She sealed it and set it on the tray for the morning post. Autumn had come to Ravenmoor the way it always did, unhurriedly, as though the estate had made its own arrangements with the season and required no assistance. The grounds were unchanged. The long approach through the beeches, the copper light through the canopy, the smell of damp earth and wood smoke from the west chimney. Seraphina arrived in the late afternoon, when the mist was beginning to settle in the lower fields, and Julian met her at the door without ceremony. He did not ask why she had come. She had told him in one sentence, and the sentence was sufficient. They dined quietly, with very little said, and after dinner, Julian led her down the corridor to the Ravenmoor study, a room she had been in only twice before, both times briefly. It was a working room, not a formal one. Shelves of ledgers and correspondence, a large desk facing the window, 2 chairs arranged at angles to the fireplace. Julian went to the desk. He opened the bottom drawer and removed a small locked correspondence box. Dark wood, brass fittings, a key on a chain that he kept on his person. He unlocked it. He lifted out a letter. He set it on the desk between them. He did not hand it to her. He stepped back and waited. Seraphina looked at the letter. Clara's handwriting on the outside, her name, written in that crowded, uneven script she would have known anywhere. She sat down in the chair nearest the desk and picked it up. The letter was 4 pages, longer than the one Miss Hartwell had carried. This was the complete version. Clara had written it 6 weeks before she died, when she still had the strength to write clearly. She described the evening of the Whitmore ball, the diagnosis, the fear, the way she had sought Julian out because she could not bear to stand in that ballroom pretending. She described what he had said and why she had needed to hear it. And then she described what came after. She had asked Julian to say nothing, Not to Seraphina, not to anyone, not until after the wedding, because she could not endure being the reason the wedding was altered or delayed or shadowed. She had been afraid of being pitied. She had been afraid of the particular look people gave a dying woman, the way it preceded her into every room and followed her out of it. She had asked Julian to keep her secret and to let the wedding proceed as planned. And Julian had agreed, because Clara had asked him with her face against his shoulder, and he had not known how to refuse her. She had not anticipated that Seraphina was in the corridor. "I did not know you heard us," Clara had written. "I did not know until much later, and by then you were gone, and I could not find the words. I was afraid that if I told you, you would understand everything except the part that mattered most, that I did this to protect myself, not to hurt you. I was frightened, and I was selfish, and I am sorry. I asked Julian to keep this letter until someone asked him for the truth. I did not know if anyone ever would." Seraphina read to the end of the 4th page. Then she set the letter down on the desk. Julian was standing near the fireplace. He had not moved while she read. "She asked you to say nothing until after the wedding," Seraphina said. He answered quietly. "Yes," Julian said. "And then I left before the wedding occurred." He held her gaze. "Yes." "And after that," Seraphina said, "she was dying, and you had promised." "Yes," Julian said. "I had promised." Seraphina stood up from the chair. She walked to the window and stood there for a moment, looking out at the dark grounds and the mist moving through the beech trees. "You should have found a way," she said. Her voice was steady. "I understand the promise. I understand why you made it and why you kept it. But you should have found a way, some way, to let me know that what I had heard was not what I believed it to be. You could have asked Clara to release you from it. You could have written me a single sentence that said nothing specific, but gave me reason to ask a question. You had a year before she died. You had time." He did not look away. "Yes," Julian said. "I did." "And you did not." "I did not," he said. "I told myself I was protecting her. I told myself the promise was sacred. But the truth—" He stopped. He began again. "The truth is that I did not know you had been in that corridor. I did not know there was anything to explain. I thought you had left for reasons I could not fathom, and the promise gave me a reason not to chase you, because chasing you would have required me to break it. And breaking it felt like a betrayal of a dying woman." He looked at her directly. "I was wrong. I chose the promise over the possibility that you needed the truth. And I was wrong." Seraphina turned from the window. "I am not asking you to forgive me," Julian said. "I am not going to ask that. What happened is what happened, and 3 years are 3 years, and nothing I say in this room tonight gives them back." "No," Seraphina said. "Nothing does." The fire had burned down to a steady low heat. The room was very quiet. "I chose silence because I thought it was dignity," Seraphina said. "I heard something that wounded me, and I decided that asking about it would be worse than not knowing. I was wrong too. We were both wrong, and the cost of it was 3 years." She paused. Clara was wrong as well. She was frightened and she was human, and she made a choice that she thought protected her, and it cost us both far more than she intended. I cannot be angry at a woman who is gone, but I can say that clearly. He said it without hesitation. "Yes," Julian said, "you can." They stood on opposite sides of the study. 3 years of silence, finely named and standing in the room between them, complete, irreversible, and at last visible. Seraphina crossed to the piano in the corner of the study, a smaller instrument than the one in the music room, used for working rather than performance. She stood beside it for a moment, her hand resting on the closed lid. Then she looked at Julian across the room. She looked at him for a long moment, long enough to be a decision, not a reflex. Long enough that he understood it was deliberate. She crossed the room and kissed him once. It was not absolution. It was not the relief of a misunderstanding resolved. It was something harder and more considered than either of those things. A choice made by a woman who knew exactly what had been lost and was choosing, with full knowledge of the loss, to step toward what remained. Julian's hand came up to her face, carefully, as though she might change her mind. She did not change her mind. Dawn came to Ravenmore slowly, the light coming in gray and then gold through the east windows of the music room, where Seraphina sat at the larger piano with the manuscript of her unfinished composition open before her. She had been up since before first light. The composition had waited 3 years for her to return to it, and now that she was here, she found that it was not as unfinished as she had believed. It needed an ending, and the ending was clear to her now in a way it had not been at 26. She heard Julian's footstep in the corridor before he appeared in the doorway. He was carrying a tray with 2 cups of tea, and he set it on the table beside the piano without comment, the way a man does something he has decided to do without making a ceremony of it. He sat in the chair nearest the piano and looked at the manuscript. "May I?" he asked. Seraphina moved the pages toward him. He read through the first movement in silence, and then he picked up the pencil from the tray. It had been lying there beside the cups, which meant he had put it there deliberately, and made a single annotation in the margin of the final page. A harmonic suggestion, 4 bars from the end, written in his small, precise hand. Seraphina looked at it. She played the passage with the annotation. Then she played it again. "Yes," she said. "That." Outside, the mist was lifting from the lower fields, and the beaches were copper in the early light. The ring was on her finger. She'd put it there herself, at some point in the night that neither of them had marked, simply picked it up from the desk where it had rested and placed it where it had always belonged. 3 years were behind them, real and permanent and lost, in the way that lost time is always lost, without remedy or return. They were simply behind them now. The 2 cups of tea sat on the tray, side by side, sending up their thin curls of steam in the morning quiet. Seraphina turned back to the manuscript, to the final pages that still needed writing, and began.